Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Bronx Book Festival. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited to announce our panel today, Black Enough, Celebrating Black Voices, and to introduce our moderator, Ibi Zoboi. Ibi Zoboi is the New York Times best-selling author of My Life as an Ice Cream Sandwich, her middle grade debut, and the young adult novels Pride and American Street, a National Book Award finalist and recipient of 5-star reviews. She's also the editor of Black Enough, Stories of Being Young and Black in America. Ibi holds an MFA in writing for children and young adults from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her writing has been published in the New York Times Book Review, the Horn Book Magazine, and The Rumpus, among others. As an educator, she is the recipient of several grants from the Brooklyn Arts Council for her community-based programs for teen girls in both Brooklyn and Haiti. She's worked for arts organizations such as Teachers and Writers Collaborative and Community Word Project, as a writer in residence, and a teaching artist in New York City public schools. Ibi, I'll pass it on to you.
Hey, everyone. So welcome to this Black Enough panel. So this Black Enough is an anthology. It's called Black Enough, Stories of Being Young and Black in America. However, I am here with Brandy, Colbert, Camryn, Garrett, and Leah Johnson. And Brandy Colbert is one of the contributors in the Black Enough anthology. And Leah Johnson and Camryn Garrett are debut authors. And we're here to discuss what it means to be Black in America, what it means to be a Black author, and what it means to be a Black creative, creating stories for and about Black children. So let's get started. I am so honored to introduce Brandy Colbert. Brandy Colbert was had one of the first YA novels I read for my MFA program, which was Point. And I loved the writing and I loved the depth of the characters that Brandy brings to her stories. So let me just pull Brandy's bio up. Here we go. Brandy Colbert is the award-winning author of several books for children and teens, including The Only Black Girls in Town, her most recent, The Revolution of Birdie Randall, Stonewall Book Award winner, Little and Lion, and the forthcoming The Voting Booth. She is co-writer of Misty Copeland's Life in Motion, Young Readers Edition, and her short fiction and essays have been published in a variety of critically acclaimed anthologies for young people. Her books have been chosen as Junior Library Guild selections and have appeared on many best of lists. Brandy is a faculty member at Hamline University's MFA program in writing for children and lives in Los Angeles. Hey, Brandy.
Hey, thank you, Evie. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, we're happy to have you. And next up is Camryn Garrett, a force on the Twitter. I remember you from way back in the day as a high schooler. Yeah. We are so proud of you.
Thank you.
Camryn was born and raised in New York. When she was 13, she was selected as a Time for Kids reporter, where she interviewed celebrities like Warren Buffett and Kristen Bell. Her writing has appeared in the Huffington Post, MTV, and Rookie magazine. In 2015, she was named as one of MTV's 8 inspiring teens using social media to change the world. And yes, she absolutely does that. And she was also named as Teen Vogue's 21 Under 21. Camryn is also interested in film and is a student at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. We're happy to have you here, Camryn, and congratulations on your debut.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes. Next up, last but not least, Leah Johnson is a writer, editor, and eternal Midwesterner, currently moonlighting as a New Yorker. She is a graduate of Indiana University and Sarah Lawrence College, where she received her MFA in fiction writing and currently teaches in their undergraduate writing program. When she's not writing, you can find her on Twitter ranting about pop culture and politics. You Should See Me in a Crown, I love that title, is her first novel. Congratulations, Leah.
Thank you.
And we're happy to have you. Yes. Can we see a cover?
I am honored to be here.
Yes.
I was like,
I love the shelves of all the...
Do y'all have the cover of the book? Come on, put it up.
I have mine, but I can get up to get it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, that's one of the things. Yep, that's
yeah. You better
Black
believe
Enough.
they sent me those author copies. I took every book off the shelf and put them on here. I said, "Yep, absolutely, we're gonna cover the whole thing."
All right, let's get started. I like to do some deep dives, so I hope y'all are ready.
Yeah.
So Camryn, Leah, and Brandy have not seen any of the questions. They don't know what I'm about to ask you. So this is a Black panel. Is Black. We are all clearly women of African descent, African American, Blackity Black, however it is that you want to claim that aspect of yourself. So let's begin with the fact that we are all authors at different stages in our careers. Some of us are veterans or have several books published, and two of you have one book out or about to come out and are just embarking on this journey. So I'm sure you have all seen that CCBC statistic about the percentage of Black authors who are being published within any given year. I think it's about, what is it? Should I say 7%? Is that too generous?
I think that's like twice as high as it actually is.
I was like, I think it's way smaller than that. In fact.
Okay, so
no matter
maybe. Okay, I'll be a little generous for the sake of making a certain argument or state. 30 books out of 3,000, right? That's not even 10%. That's a very low number, right? A very small number of books out of 3,000 are published by Black authors, and even more books are published about Black children by non-Black authors. And I think we've all heard the spiels and listened to the conversations and tweeted about it and been on panels about it. This is not a diversity panel. So given that statistics, what has been your challenges and your blessing, whether or not it was a bumpy road or a smooth road for you to become a published author? Let's start with Brandy.
You're going to do
Can
that.
you tell us when your debut came out and a little bit about just how you got there?
Yeah. So my debut came out in 2014, which makes me feel like a dinosaur. But I had been trying to get published for, I would say about 8 years before that is when I started querying. And I had a long road. I wrote 4 books. Point was the 4th book that I wrote. And, I had a struggle. It was a struggle, but I will say that my writing needed to improve. So it wasn't necessarily just the fact that people weren't looking for books like mine. The writing was improving as I was going along. I finally found an agent. And then, that saying, it only takes one. That was definitely the case for me. Only one agent, wanted to represent me. Only one editor out of all the ones that we submitted to wanted to publish me. And so that was, I don't know, it was a long struggle. And I honestly just kind of thought it would just be one book for me. And, my first book, I don't really think it covered a lot of Blackness per se. It was something I was more comfortable with, which was growing up. I grew up in the Midwest in Missouri, the Missouri Ozarks, if you're familiar with that area. It's a very white area. So I set the book in a primarily white area with a Black protagonist, as that's kind of what I knew. And it engaged with some aspects of being Black, but not too many. So I felt like that was maybe more palatable for people back then because there weren't a lot of debut Black authors getting published back in 2014.
Cool. 2014, right? So you've been published for 6 years.
Yeah.
6 years. How many books?
Oh, gosh. 6 years. And my 6th book is about to come out, and I have 7 and 8 on the way next year. So
wow. So you averaged about 1 book a year.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah.
There was like a 3-year gap between my first and second books. And then after that, it's been pretty steady somehow. I don't know how.
Cool. Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you.
Camryn, I think we've all seen, anyone who's been following you on Twitter, we've kind of were witness to your journey to becoming a published author. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, definitely. It's a little different because, like you said, I was on Twitter when I was a teenager, and I'm 20 years old now. So it's a little weird to compare to other people because I sound weird. But I got my first agent when I was 15, and we were trying to go out with a book. And a lot of the editors kept saying, this is too similar to The Hate U Give, because there was police brutality and protests, even though the plots weren't similar outside of that. And when that book didn't sell, I was like, I'm never going to be published. I'm a failure. And I was 16, and my mother was tired of me. And then I got my second agent, and I wrote something that I really loved, and that became my debut, which is Full Disclosure.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question, but we're going to get to Leah Johnson first. Leah, what has been your journey?
Yeah, so sort of like Camryn said, I am a child of the internet. So all the things I learned about writing, I learned and practiced online, which is sort of embarrassing. You can like find it now, but you know, it got me here. And so my journey started with writing an essay out of frustration about the lack of diversity in YA when I was growing up, and the ways that I still saw writers struggling to get published, and books that did not center on pain or violence, the lack of those emerging to the market. And so I wrote this essay for a website called Electric Lit, and the woman who became my agent, emailed me after reading that essay that same day and was like, "Hey, read this thing. Just wondering if you had anything you were working on that maybe, I don't know, addressed any of the issues you were talking about." And I said, "It's funny you should mention it because I'm in grad school right now trying to figure out how to finish this manuscript. So I would love to talk to you about it." And it progressed really quickly from there. That was February of 2018. And by July of 2018, I had sold You Should See Me in a Crown on proposal. And so it was much quicker and much less arduous than a lot of the publishing journeys that I've heard many authors, but you know, largely Black authors talking about.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Leah. Camryn, we're going to go back to something that you mentioned. You wrote something that was being compared to The Hate U Give, and it's a very popular book, very successful book. Have Leah, you Brandy, ever come across that where you wrote something and you got some pushback saying, "Well, we got that Black thing already"? Has that been your experience?
That hasn't happened.
We have that Black concept, Black idea.
Yeah. I think the last time it happened to me was with that book, where with everyone, the idea was like, we already have a book that's similar, even though, again, it was really only two aspects that were similar, and they didn't want to take it on. Whereas I felt after The Hate U Give, I saw a lot of books about police brutality and about that sort of aspect of racism. And I found it odd because it seems like there was the picking and choosing of what stories we want to tell at what time. And it didn't seem to make any sort of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. You know, I think a lot of people have that experience. Leah?
Yeah, I think, like I said, my process was really quick. And so I haven't had a chance to go out on sub with a book before. I kind of had a much quicker process in that way. But I will say, when I was in grad school, I went to Sarah Lawrence, which is a predominantly white MFA program. And so I was one of the only fiction writers in my cohort. And I remember distinctly that the story that I brought to my workshop my second year, where there was clear violence against against Black folks, and it was systemic violence, it was institutional violence, it wasn't necessarily physical direct violence, but I remember the overwhelming enthusiasm that I got for that story, as opposed to the stories that I brought where it was happy-go-lucky. The kids were falling in love, they were smooching under the stars. Like, they were like, no, give us some more of that Black pain. That's what we like. That's what we understand. And so, you know, I think it's a lot easier, particularly for white folks and particularly for, you know, powerful institutions, to palette stories where we are being like brutalized in that way. And this is not the question that you asked, Ibi. I'm sorry for pivoting away, but it just really made me
moving into good territory. Yeah.
Can I just say something
really
too?
Made me think about that.
I'm
no,
sorry.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Oh, Camryn, okay.
No, I'm so sorry. I was going to say that I definitely always question that and question. It's difficult not to when I see books coming out by Black authors about Black teens, seeing how they're marketed and which ones get attention depending on the subject matter. And if it's a romance, a lot of times people say, I don't know about this book, I haven't heard about this book. And a lot of times white people won't be the ones raving about those books because they're quiet or they're not interesting enough or they don't teach them something. And it's really frustrating.
Now, Brandy, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Ibi, you and I have had lots of private conversations about this very topic, and I'm glad you brought that up, Leah, because I feel like as someone, I haven't really had that experience of like, we already have this Black author here. I think because I write books that don't specifically deal with that Black pain aspect. I mean, if you read my books, they all deal with Blackness in various ways. And, they're written by, I hope they're written by someone who has Black and has those experiences and knows what it's like. But I do think what Camryn and Leah is saying is spot on. I feel like, we need all of these books for sure. But it is a little sad to see the books that get more attention because, like you said, they are teaching people something, or they just feel like it's more valid to read about Black pain than it is to read about Black joy. And I think that's starting to change a little bit, but it's still slow. So I think it's really something that gatekeepers need to think about and work on.
In terms of people who are reading and buying these types of books or all of our books, do you think the onus is on also the readers and other kinds of gatekeepers like librarians and teachers? What I notice on this side of the fence in terms of writing for young people is that we're selling units of books, meaning a book that can be taught in a classroom where a teacher can develop a curriculum, and that curriculum could, can last for a number of years, right? Versus books that cannot necessarily be taught in a classroom. It's more like a pleasure read. Do you think the onus is also on what schools are providing for young readers? Or do you think it's the publisher or just everybody?
I think there's an interplay between both of those bodies, right? So like it is the job of the consumer in this way to show that these books are marketable, to show that they can be sold, to show that it's not a bad investment to make in taking on these books. And so in that way, librarians, teachers, workshop leaders, folks who are essentially the people who shape the canon. We know what the canon is because it is what we are taught when we're in schools. And so if they are the ones who champion more diverse stories, or the ones who champion more Black stories that don't revolve around, Black pain, then the canon will change. But then it also goes back to like the insidiousness of capitalism. And it's like, how well can we sell this? If we can't sell it, we're not going to take on anymore. And so it's cyclical. But how do they find out about those stories if those books aren't being marketed well? And they're not going to get marketed well if they're not being sold well.
Right.
So, it's a constant,
it's a conundrum.
A constant struggle.
Right. Now, I have lists of questions, but then the conversations are so rich that I'm just going to piggyback on everything that you brought up. So, Leah, you teach in a writing program, correct?
Yes.
Brandy teaches at Hamlin. Camryn, you were at the Tisch School. So you all are in some facet of arts education. And what you just said, Leah, about shaping the canon. When you're studying, when you're sharing a piece of work or a body of work with your students, and Camryn, when you're learning about a piece of work or a body of work from a filmmaker, or whether it's like learning something thematic or whatever goes into filmmaking, what kinds of works are you studying? And that absolutely has an impact on what you're buying to study as well. So what do you think? What kind of books are you using as canon, whether you're teaching, or what kind of books your teachers in your program, Camryn, are using as, not books, but films, are using that as canon? And are they Black authors or filmmakers?
It's difficult specifically from my point of view because it's so hard just to get professors to teach Black art in general. So when we do get something, everyone grabs onto it and no one really wants to critique it, especially since there's usually 3 or 4. The amount of Black kids in film school is similar to the amount of Black authors publishing every year. It's like 7%. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to critique our own art in front of all these white people. No. But that being said, you know, there have been so many situations where people who are not Black will present work that highlights Black pain. Mm-hmm. And then the few Black students in the class are the ones who have to be like, why is this what you're focusing on? Don't you think this is a bit problematic? And it can be tough because there are so few Black professors that if you have a professor who isn't Black, they're going to be like, why are you silencing this person's art? And then you look like you have some sort of problem. It's difficult, and I think it's the nature of art school, unless it's different in writing.
Mm. Well, you know, I think it's probably like that. It's probably like that in programs across the country. I know in my MFA, when I was a student, I certainly wasn't being given super diverse text to talk through, learn with. But as far as my classroom is concerned, we have a couple of cardinal rules. One is that, you know, our workshop is grounded in empathy, so don't come in here trying to, you know, critique people's work for the sake of critiquing their work. 2, there are no straight white men that get taught in my classroom. Y'all can get that somewhere else. Y'all can go to, you know, somebody else's classic lit class to do that. In my classroom, my syllabus is full of, so I teach a class specifically about writing adolescent characters. So I teach, you know, Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe. I taught The Poet X last year. I teach excerpts from Darius the Great Is Not Okay. I teach Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. So I try to make it a point that, one, we always prioritize the voices of writers of color, and whenever possible, we center the stories of queer writers of color, because I know that for me as a queer writer, I know that my narrative has been even further marginalized over the course of history. And so it's important to me to make those at the heart of what we learned in that class, because anything you can learn from a white man's book, anything I could learn in Infinite Jest, I could learn in a Jessamine Ward novel. You know what I mean? And so it's just important for me to move that out of the way and move us to the center of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about you, Brandy?
Yeah, Hamlin operates on, you know, a pretty similar principle as Leah's workshop. We have a book list that rotates each semester now, kind of revamped that. And the people on the book committee really dig in and make sure that, I mean, I don't think there's any straight white men on our book list. I'd have to look, but I'd be surprised. I don't really read men, so I just kind of don't pay attention to that. I just never.
Right, I don't even.
Yeah, I really just never really read men. If I do, it's queer men, because I'm just more interested in that perspective. But yeah, we always make sure there's diversity in, you know, race and ethnicity, disability, sexuality, just pretty much any diversity you can get. We have a common read. I've been at Hamlin for 2 years now teaching, and I think all of our common reads have been by authors of color or queer authors. So we do a really good job because, you know, Hamlin it's a low residency, so we aren't meeting constantly, but we're coming for residency twice a year and then working remotely through the year. And it's, you know, it's in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, or St. Paul, Twin Cities. And, you know, our student body is pretty white. Our program is pretty white. So I think that, you know, the program director and all the faculty like really make a point to make sure that some people are reading completely out of their comfort zone, have never probably even read, you know, authors of color when they come into the program. So we just make sure that they get used to that. And, you know, we've seen it change a lot of people's views and their reading habits, which is great.
Cool. Wow, this is a
Brandy raises a really
discussion.
important.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think Brandy raises a really important point, and that's that it has to be an active, concerted effort to like usurp a lot of the ideas about what classic literature is or what the type of literature it is we should be learning. I remember I went to my program director when I was in my MFA, and I was like, where are all the Black people? Why don't we have any Black people, not only on syllabi, but like teaching in this program from semester to semester? And he was like, you know what, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even notice. When I started here, I hired my, I hired the writers that I knew, and I was reading white people, and my friends were white people. And so the program, like, whiteness begets more whiteness. And so until people in positions of authority look past like what the default is, look past what they are used to or what they're already comfortable with, then this is like, that's just what the programs are going to look like. I hate to say, we got to pull up a seat to the table, because the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. But I do very much believe that, like, everybody who has an opportunity to be in a classroom, it is part of the work.
Yeah.
It is part of the work to undo those ideas actively.
All right, last question. No, not second to last question. So we have two, it is the last question, 2 Midwesterners and 2 native New Yorkers. And the different parts of the country. Culture is very different. Also different time periods as well. So let's make this fun. The books that we write are part of the entertainment culture. There is a different type of media. Camryn, it's very interesting that you are a filmmaker or burgeoning filmmaker and an author as well. So that's 2 different media that you're working in. Can you all just name, you don't have to explain, can you kind of name 3 different types of media that we're probably all familiar with that describes your brand of Blackness? So I'll start to give you an example. So the first kind of the brand of Blackness that I can relate to that is immediately like, yep, that's me. Immediate nod for me is Issa Rae on Insecure. I get her.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Type of music for me is R&B, 80s and 90s R&B, probably Mary J. Blige and Jill Scott. That's the second type of media. And for me, books, where I saw myself the most recent is in Elizabeth Acevedo's Poet X. So you get what I'm asking, right? Can you name 3 different types of media that kind of represents your brand of Blackness? And it doesn't have to be a piece of Black art or content that's created by Black creative. Let's start with you, Camryn. You got it?
Yeah. Oh man. This is gonna take me a little bit. Does anyone else have like something right now?
Anybody ready to go?
No, this is hard. It's great. It's hard.
It's just a little bit.
Anything that you've seen recently?
I'm
you know what? I said this, and oh, go ahead, Camryn. Go ahead.
I'm reading this book called How to Love a Jamaican by Alexia Arthurs, and my mother's Jamaican, and I always feel so removed from the culture because I'm so American. And reading that and reading about the diaspora really, really makes me feel seen in a way that I haven't before. So that would be my book. Leah, what were you going to say?
Well, I was gonna say a piece of media that I felt really I felt seen by, but there were no Black people in this movie, so I want to preface this by saying that. And that's The Half of It on Netflix by Alice Wu.
I love it so much. I'm sorry, I love it.
That I was so moved by that movie because this like idea of this young girl of color, she's not Black, but this young girl of color being in this really whitewashed, like homogenous community, like reckoning with her queerness in that space and her familial obligations and trying to navigate this relationship with someone, a friendship with someone who maybe doesn't quite understand, but loves her, but doesn't get where she's coming from. That I was like, wow, never seen it. And I love it. So there's that.
I'm going to date myself so much right now, but so I was 16 when the movie Clueless came out, and I remember going to see it at the theater 3 times, spending like my little, minimum wage paycheck to go see this movie 3 times because of Dion. And Stacey Dash is a terrible person. I think we can all agree with that. But her character Dion just meant so much to me to see, because I grew up in a very, very white town. It was about 3% Black when I was growing up in the 90s, and it was just like the first time I had really seen like a Black girl hanging out with a bunch of white people, and it was like okay, and she was still allowed to be, you know, like her version of Black. So I don't know, that just really resonated with me. And it was also just kind of like a very different depiction of Black girlhood than you really got to see at the time, if really any, in the 90s. And then for books, I would say this came later, but ZZ Packer's Drinking Coffee Elsewhere, her collection of short stories was just like blew open my entire world. It was shortly after I decided to start writing for publication, and it just, again, like presented so many different aspects of being Black that I had never seen on the page before, and really made me feel validated and seen. And like I could write, you know, my experience with Blackness and still be taken seriously and not be told that I wasn't Black, which is what I heard growing up in Missouri constantly.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I think to tag on to what
I love
Brandy
your responses.
said,
Yeah.
Jody from Daria, I think, is a important character. Now, Daria is almost before my time, but you know,
Yeah, I don't know
like,
what Daria really is.
No.
I know
Okay.
the image of her,
Start
but I
watching.
don't know
Start
like,
watching.
exactly what it is. I know. I'm sorry.
We'll love it.
It's iconic. You know, like it's iconic, and
You know,
obviously,
90s girl. Yeah.
right? If nothing else, then you know, millennials love nostalgia. But I was just working on an essay with someone recently who was writing about the idea of like the messy white girl, the white girl who gets to just make mistakes and go out and get drunk and get brought home in a cop car and all this, you know, all these like mistakes that we're never permitted to make. And there's this really beautiful scene in not beautiful, kind of painful actually, but beautiful in its honesty, in Daria, where Jody is talking about like, you know, at home I get to just be Jody, but when I go to school I have to be Jody, like queen of the African American teens. I have to be this model citizen. I have to be, you know, all these things that I shouldn't necessarily have to consider all the time. And I think like that image of Blackness, this like impossible standard of what it means to be Black and excellent, that's one of the things that I saw and did feel really represented by.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have one last question, right? Let me do another difficult one.
Oh man.
Do you all feel, or do you, as kind of with your public personas, in terms of social media, or even when you're out on the road for conferences and school visits, do you perform a certain kind of Blackness? And does your public Blackness reflect your private Blackness?
I haven't so far, but I feel almost guilty about it because I don't always feel Black enough. Like I was talking about before with How to Love a Jamaican, I don't necessarily feel Jamaican. And one thing I talk to my friends about all the time is sometimes I feel like I don't have a culture because Black culture is so broadly accepted as American culture. So it feels like I'm just being American and not specifically Black. And sometimes I feel jealous of my friends from different backgrounds because they have specific food and language, and I don't necessarily feel I have that, even though I know we do. So that's something I'm constantly thinking about, especially when I'm the only Black person on a panel, and I'm thinking, am I Black enough to represent everyone, even though that's not really possible for one person to do.
Thank you. That was honest. Thank you for sharing that, Camryn.
I think I'm still pretty early on, and Camryn, you probably feel this way too. Like aside from virtual panels, I've only been able to go to one festival in person as an author. So I haven't had that much time to really like figure out what my public image is going to look like, what it's going to be like moving through those spaces. Because when I turn this camera off, I just default back to being my mother's daughter who's like complaining because there's no honey buns in the cabinet. You know what I mean? But I will say that, and Camryn, you were talking about this recently, actually. There is a certain expectation that we will carry on discourse in a specific way. So especially on social media, if something comes up that is problematic, that deserves to be addressed, deserves to be critiqued in a real way. The expectation is often that writers of color will not be too mean when they're having those conversations, or, oh, like, give them a chance, you haven't even read the book yet, or, You know, or when we point out problematic behavior, all of a sudden it's called drama and it's not called discourse anymore. And so what does it mean to like choose when to wade into that, when we have to sit back? What effect might that have on our careers? Those are all things that I very much consider when I'm on social media.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Brandy?
Yeah, I mean, you know me. I'm on social media, but I'm not really on it. So
I wish I were you.
No, you know, I learn a lot and I see a lot, but I don't necessarily engage. I think for me, when people meet me in person, they're maybe just more surprised about that I'm pretty outspoken and that I do have a lot to say because I don't use social media to say it.
Right.
Much give you my opinion on anything and everything, and I'm not really afraid to wade into those difficult topics, but I just feel much more comfortable doing it in person. So yeah, but I totally relate to Camryn, just feeling like, you know, that kind of insecurity of like, okay, if I'm the only Black person on this panel, which, you know, and I will say debuting in 2014, I very often was the only Black person on a panel if I happened to even make it onto one that wasn't a diversity panel. And, you know, that can feel like a lot of pressure. But, you know, I just try to remember that I'm just one person and my Blackness is unique and, you know, I don't speak for everybody else. So.
Cool. And let me get, okay, one word answer. This is a fire round, right? One word answer on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 5. And 5 being like your perception of Blackness in the media and what people considered very Black, and 1 being homegirl from Clueless, right? Or something like that. Meaning Oreo type, you know, I'm thinking of your story, Oreo, in Black Enough. So how Black is your novel, your latest novel, in terms of tone or character? 1 to 5. And then we'll end there. Who wants to start? Camryn?
3.
Okay, right
2,
in the middle.
for sure. 2.
Long pause.
2.
I think my main character is one of the only Black people in the book, and her family are the only other people really in the entire community who are Black or brown. So yeah, it's not definitely, we're not rocking on a 5. I'll tell you that.
Okay, all right. Brandy, your title is almost self-explanatory, almost.
Yeah, like it kind of, you know, mirrors Leah's book too a little bit in that way that, you know, it's about 2 girls who are the only Black ones. But I will say there is like a historical element to it. They find these journals and go back and really dig into Black history. So it talks about Blackness a lot. So I would say like a 3 to 4 maybe for me, which is
all right. All right, cool. Okay. I hope you enjoyed the questions. I really enjoyed your responses. Very thoughtful and informative and inspiring. And I think we're going to wrap it up. This is where audience Q&A would come in. So one audience being like a random person on the internet sending their question. So of course the internet is our entire audience right now. Very fascinating. So please tell me, what are you working on now? And on a scale of 1 to 5, how Black is that? Let's start with you, Brandy.
Okay.
What are you working on now?
I have 2 things that, well, I have a book out in July called The Voting Booth that will be out on July 7th, but that's completely done. So I'm working on 2 books that have not been announced, so I cannot tell you much about them. I would say, so I'm working on a middle grade novel. It's a retelling of a very popular story. It's, you know, it's like a 2, and then on the Blackness scale. And then I'm working working on a nonfiction project, a nonfiction project that's a 5 for sure. So that's
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, sounds fascinating. Right? Leah, what are you working on?
Yeah, so I have a book out next year. It's called Rise to the Sun. It's about 2 girls named Tony and Olivia who go to a music festival in search of something, and they find each other and realize that they're better together than they are apart. And You know, one of the things I thought about, I can't do this in like a one number. I do have to do like a qualifier for this. One of the things I thought about after I finished writing You Should See Me in a Crown is that like the way that Blackness is often discussed is in opposition to whiteness. And so in Rise to the Sun, even though music festivals are almost always, except for Afropunk, predominantly white spaces, I don't write into whiteness in any real way. These girls are Black. They fall in love with each other. Their best friends are Black. They're, you know what I'm saying? So like in that way, whiteness doesn't really play a role in it. And so I'd say it's a 4, but also it's Black girls at a music festival. So, you know, it's probably pretty Dion-like in that narrative. So.
My
Camryn?
Yeah, mine, I'm trying to, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about my second book yet, but
Camryn, please.
What?
We need to know. We need to know. The fans are waiting.
The fans are screaming. I don't know. I mean, it has to do a lot with the Me Too movement, which is Black because it was started by a Black woman. So I feel like that adds another star. And the love interest is Black. So I feel like this is like 3, even though they're like working within the confines of Hollywood, which is very white. So like this is another 3.
Did we lose Ibi? Am I still here?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I lost Camryn for a little bit.
Oh,
okay,
sorry.
Cool. All right. So I think the next question we asked, I think we answered some of the other questions about challenges when writing or trying to publish Black stories. Do you want to touch on that again? I can add that one of the major challenges writing about Black stories is writing different types of stories from one book to the other, to the next, meaning I have like sci-fi nerd story, I have a love story remix, I have Black pain, I have another Black pain, and then I flip and go do it again. And people are not, I don't want to be a one trick pony. So that's my challenge. Anyone want to add to that or talk about your own, a specific challenge to writing about Black characters for a Black audience or as a Black woman or non-binary?
I definitely think that it can be difficult to try to explore topics that I'm nervous about tackling when I love my editor. My editor is amazing, but my editor is not Black. So she pushes me in a lot of ways, but with certain topics, I don't think she's really able to push me. And so that can be worrisome. Like I can depend on other Black readers, but it's sort of like, I'm not going to be writing like Toni Morrison types. I mean, I wasn't going to in the first place, but you know what I mean? It's sort of like I'm on my own there.
Mm-hmm.
I think to that end, one of the things that was most challenging for me while writing You Should See Me in a Crown is feeling as though I had the authority to tell that story. Even though in a lot of ways, me and my main character, my experience is templated on top of hers. I'm Black, I'm queer, I was raised in relative poverty. I was raised surrounded by white people, and so I had to navigate my Blackness in that type of environment. So those things are all very similar, but still I had all these questions about like, am I actually queer enough to tell this story? Am I Black enough to tell this story? Is this authentic enough? I think one of my main concerns was that somebody was going to be like, that's just not, Black people aren't like that. That's not a Black story because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And I had to figure out, like I had to unlearn this idea of what Blackness is because it's always Black enough. It's always going to be a Black story. If it was written by me, it's always going to be Black, regardless of the content that's inside of it, because it was shaped by a political experience that was colored by my Blackness, a political and lived experience that's colored by my Blackness. So I think that's one of the challenges that I think about often when I talk about the writing of the book.
Thank you, Leah. Brandy, can we flip your question for a little bit?
Yeah.
What has been one challenge that you have overcome over the course of several books? Let's give the debuts like a glimmer of hope that whatever you're going through right now, you may overcome it, or it may be a thing of the past. Have you overcome any challenges whatsoever at this point with books 6, 7, and 8 on the way?
Right. I mean, I'm not sure, because I feel like one of my challenges has been getting people to acknowledge, you know, Black middle-class girls, because I feel like a lot of it is people don't want to see necessarily people who grew up next to them and then know that, you know, for example, like people I grew up with a lot of white people. And I think maybe for them reading that, you know, okay, we had similar socioeconomic status, all of that, but I went through challenges that you'll never understand. I think that's difficult for a lot of people because they just want to see Black people in poverty or just in these boxes they've put Black people into. And those are absolutely valid stories. But I think that a lot of people have trouble, you know, seeing a character that might be more similar to them than they think. So I don't know if, you know, I still feel like that's a challenge to kind of get those stories recognized and accepted on the same level as we've talked about many times here as the Black pain stories. But I think it's getting better. I just feel the freedom to sort of write the stories that I want to write, and that they don't have to be centered around, you know, those narratives. And I think that alone is overcoming, you know, a challenge that I don't know. I just don't know if I expected to be where I am today, being able to write stories that mean a lot to me. So I think that's overcoming something.
Can I?
That is. I truly believe it is. Yeah, really quick. Yeah.
So one of the other questions was like, who are your favorite Black authors when you were a teenager? And Brandy's first book came out when I was still a teenager, actually. So
oh wow.
I just wanted to say that like there's
when it came out.
Yeah, I was about to say I was pretty young. And so you know, one of the things that has been really fantastic for the time that I've come into my adulthood is that seeing more stories that exist in these previously empty spaces. So like the emergence of a Black middle class in YA, like that was something that I didn't see a lot when I was growing up. And so like in that way, you know, those are challenges, those are things that we're still writing through. But I'm really grateful to writers like you, Brandy, especially, who like started doing that work that like kind of made space for us me and Camryn to just squirrel on through here, you know?
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's so I'll just add some final thoughts. I think it is a huge accomplishment that we each have books out there in the world, regardless of what publishers may or may not be doing for us, regardless of what the response is to our books. But it's a book. It's out there. It's cataloged. It will find its reader. Very much like Leah found Brandy and Camryn found Brandy and other authors when they were teenagers. Your books will find the right reader, and it's there. And I think it is a huge accomplishment that we're all writing different types of Black characters, and that, you know, to take that into consideration. There's a long, long way to go, but we're here. We're here and we're doing it, and we're winning. We're winning this part of the race. Thank you all. Wonderful comments. And thank you for just being your beautiful, brilliant Black selves. I think we can wrap it up now.
And I want to thank you all, Camryn, Ibi, Leah, and Brandy, for doing this, especially with virtual technical difficulties and stuff. Please support these authors. You can order their books or pre-order their books at thebronxisreadingbooks.com. They're all magnificent, amazing authors. I feel privileged to have even been able to sit here and listen to you guys talk. So please, please, please get their books and support them that way. And thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.